The Forest of Screaming Trees, Episode 1, Whispers in the Pines. They said the forest was quiet until the screams began. The hikers tightened their packs and stepped onto the narrow trail that led into the heart of an ancient forest. Every tree loomed like a silent sentinel, its branches twisted like gnarled fingers against the gray sky. Legends whispered through the nearby towns, told of travelers who vanished without a trace. Some called it haunted, others cursed, and the locals refused to enter after sunset. By the time they reached the clearing for their first camp, a cold wind had risen, rattling the pines and carrying a faint, unplaceable sound. "Probably just the wind," Mark said, though his voice wavered. His friends nodded, but each step deeper into the forest seemed to swallow their confidence. The first scream came just as the campfire sputtered, low and distant, almost pleading. The hikers froze. A human scream so unmistakable, yet impossibly far away, echoed through the trees. "Did you hear that?" whispered Sarah, her flashlight trembling in her grip. No one answered. The forest swallowed their voices, leaving only the lingering echo of anguish. They tried to dismiss it. Old legends told of spirits trapped among the trees, a warning passed down for generations. The stories spoke of travelers who had wandered too far, never to return, their voices woven into the forest itself. Mark scoffed quietly, but a chill ran down his spine as the whispers returned, so faint, almost coaxing, almost pleading. "Help me." One hiker swore the whispers sounded like their own names. Night deepened. Shadows danced between the trunks, and the firelight flickered against shapes that didn't belong. Tent zippers rattled. Something was moving just beyond the circle of light. Liam swore he saw a figure standing perfectly still, watching. When he blinked, it was gone. The air thickened, heavy with the scent of damp earth and decay. Every crackle of the fire seemed amplified, as if the forest listened and mocked them. Sarah's hands shook while she tied extra knots on the tent stakes, afraid they would give way to something unseen. Every snap of a twig made them jump, every gust of wind a voice calling from nowhere. They huddled closer, tension building with every rustle. The screams returned sharper this time, human yet alien. They sounded as though 100 voices were trapped inside the bark of the trees, pressing through the surface of the world and screaming to be heard. Sarah whispered, "This isn't right. We shouldn't be here." A branch snapped nearby, but no one had moved. The wind carried a low moan, like someone crying in a rhythm that matched their own heartbeat. The forest felt alive, patient, watching, remembering. Every shadow seemed to linger too long, every silhouette too deliberate. By midnight, the forest had swallowed the trail. Footsteps circled the tents. Whispers twisted into voices they recognized, memories from childhood, moments from earlier that day, names called in tones of fear and panic. Phones lost signal, compasses spun uselessly, and the path they had followed vanished beneath the black canopy. Mark's flashlight caught something disturbing. Carvings in a nearby tree, dozens of names etched deep into the bark. Some were old, weathered by time. Some looked freshly gouged. One name made his stomach tighten. It belonged to someone who had disappeared decades ago, according to local stories. And then he saw it his own name, carved deep into the tree, glistening as if freshly cut. The screaming grew louder, echoing from every direction at once. It pressed against their skulls like a tide of despair, and every hiker felt it burrowing into their mind. They realized the forest remembered. It remembered every visitor who had dared to enter, every soul lost, every voice trapped within its ancient wood. Liam bolted suddenly, shouting that he saw someone calling him from the shadows. In a blink, he was gone. Sarah screamed, reaching out, but only air met her hands. The forest swallowed him silently. Mark froze, unable to move, feeling the oppressive weight of unseen eyes pressing down. They stumbled through the underbrush, branches whipping against their faces. The screams now seemed personal, voices repeating their own worst fears and regrets. The forest was no longer a place. They realized it was a trap, a living entity that thrived on memory and fear. Every step forward felt like sinking deeper into its heart. At the center of the clearing, a massive tree rose above the others, its trunk twisted, blackened, and scarred with countless carvings. It seemed older than time, its bark pulsing faintly like a living heartbeat. The whispers swirled around it, forming shapes too quick to identify, too human to ignore. Sarah collapsed against the tree, trying to listen past the noise. The whispers became words she could almost understand, names and warnings tangled together. Leave or join us forever. Her fingers traced one carved word, only to feel it pulse beneath her touch. The tree was alive, and it remembered them. They tried to run, but the forest twisted around them. Paths they thought familiar looped back into the darkness. The shadows seemed to reach, dragging at their feet, tugging them toward the center. Every scream from the trees was now mirrored in their own voices, blending, multiplying, echoing endlessly. Mark fell to his knees, listening to the forest chant their names. Every gust of wind seemed like a warning, every crack of a branch a step closer to an inevitable end. Fear clutched at their throats, pressing words unspoken from their lips. Suddenly, silence fell. It was not peace, but expectation. They dared not speak, dared not move. Something massive stirred in the center of the clearing, and the shadows coalesced into a shape that breathed and pulsed like the forest itself. It watched them, patient and knowing. As dawn approached, Sarah and Mark finally stumbled out of the forest's edge. Their legs were scraped, their eyes wide, their breaths ragged. They dared not speak, for fear that even a word might call the forest's attention again. Behind them, the trees swayed gently in the morning breeze, as if nothing had happened. But they had heard the whispers. They had felt the eyes upon them. In the quiet, they knew with dreadful certainty. The forest had remembered. If you'd never want to camp here, remember to subscribe, and maybe keep the lights on tonight. The Forest of Screaming Trees, Episode 2. The Forest Remembers. The forest did not forget. Weeks after Sarah and Mark barely escaped, a folklore researcher named Thomas arrived, drawn by rumors of disappearances and whispers carried on the wind. Locals warned him not to enter, speaking of travelers who had vanished for good, but he dismissed their fear as superstition. He wanted proof, something tangible, something the forest could not hide. Thomas carried a notebook full of old reports, diary fragments, and newspaper clippings chronicling lost hikers, missing campers, and strange lights in the woods. Each story told the same chilling truth. Those who ventured too far were never the same, if they returned at all. Some vanished entirely, leaving only footprints that ended abruptly in moss and roots. He set up camp near the forest's edge, notebooks and recording devices spread around him. As night fell, an unnatural wind rose, rustling the pines. From deep within the shadows came the first screams, faint but unmistakable. He froze, listening. They were not random. They were deliberate, as if the forest remembered every voice that had ever cried out in its depths. The whispers began almost immediately, brushing against his ears like fingers, repeating words he had never spoken aloud. Thomas shivered. "I'm not here to harm you," he muttered into the night, more to calm himself than anyone else. But the forest answered with laughter, a sound that carried both menace and sorrow. One voice called his name, perfectly clear, from somewhere deep between the trees. He followed the sound, notebook clutched tightly. Paths he had mapped on the way and twisted impossibly before him. The trees seemed to move when he wasn't looking, shifting, reshaping, closing exits and opening new passages. His flashlight illuminated carvings he had not seen in the past, names etched with unnatural precision, some recent, some centuries old. A sudden rustling behind him made him whirl, but there was nothing. only the shadows. Only the whispers, now forming phrases he could almost understand. "We are still here. We are waiting." He recorded it, trembling, hoping this evidence would finally prove the stories true. Hours passed. The forest tested him. Shapes moved at the edges of his vision, always gone when he looked directly. He found a clearing he had not known existed, and in the center, a massive tree loomed, older and more twisted than anything he had seen. Its bark was blackened, scarred with centuries of carvings. The whispers coalesced here, forming a chorus of cries that sounded like hundreds of voices, human, alien, familiar, and mournful. Thomas felt an unbearable pull toward the tree, as if it could read his mind, his fears, and his regrets. Shadows pressed in around him, flickering like smoke, carrying faces and forms of those who had disappeared before him. The forest was alive with memory. It remembered every soul, every step, every scream. Something touched his shoulder. Nothing was there. He tried to step back, but the ground shifted beneath him. Roots moved like serpents, tripping him, forcing him forward. The whispers grew louder, now speaking in fragments he could understand. "Stay, stay." Fear gripped him with icy hands, yet fascination rooted him to the spot. The stories were true. Every word was true. Minutes or hours passed, time indistinguishable in the forest's oppressive darkness. He stumbled upon a hidden hollow at the base of the massive tree. Inside, he found dozens of objects: discarded shoes, old camping gear, and pieces of clothing, all tattered and marked by the forest. Some were recent. Others seemed centuries old. He realized these were the remains of those who had vanished, preserved by the forest itself. The screams intensified, merging into a single deafening roar that seemed to echo through the very roots of the trees. Thomas fell to his knees, covering his ears. The air itself vibrated with the voices, pressing against his mind. He could see fleeting shadows among the roots, twisted forms of those trapped, reaching, writhing, and whispering. A whisper directly in his ear, colder than ice, said, "We see you." He crawled back from the hollow, his notebook shaking in his hands. The forest had tested him and claimed a piece of his mind. He realized then that it did not just trap the bodies of the lost, it kept their essence, their memories, their very selves, embedded into the wood and soil. This forest remembered everything. By dawn, Thomas found himself at the edge again, exhausted, bleeding from minor scrapes, eyes wide with a terror that no story had prepared him for. He dared not speak. Behind him, the trees whispered, shifting in the morning breeze as if nothing had happened. He knew the forest would always remember him. He knew he could never show others the path, never guide anyone safely through. But he also knew that if he ever wanted to survive a night here again, he would need to pay attention, remember every sound, and respect every warning. Somewhere deep in his mind, he wondered if others would believe his story. He realized that those who hadn't yet heard the forest's whispers could still survive, but only if they listened. If they subscribed to the warnings that reached them quietly, like a voice in the wind, they might just make it out alive. And he swore to himself that he would not be the last to remember. The Forest of Screaming Trees, Episode 3, The Roots of Memory. No one enters the forest twice without paying a price. Weeks after Thomas returned, haunted and trembling, a new group of adventurers arrived, drawn by curiosity, disbelief, and the lure of a challenge. The rumors called it cursed, haunted, and deadly, but they scoffed. Legends were for children, or so they told themselves. The group set up at the old clearing, the one Mark and Sarah had barely escaped from. The air was damp, carrying a faint scent of decay that seemed almost intentional, like a warning. Every tree cast shadows that stretched unnaturally long, twisting and bending as if alive. Their flashlights cut narrow beams, illuminating moss and twisted roots, but never the forest's true depth. One of them, Nina, shivered and said, "I feel like we're being watched." Her words fell on nervous laughter, yet none of them could deny the weight in the silence, the subtle pressure that made each step uncertain. The forest moved around them, waiting, remembering. The first scream came within an hour, distant, human, unbearably full of pain. They froze, staring into the darkness. A voice whispered Nina's name, soft but unmistakable, carried through the trees. The others claimed it was the wind. Nina did not speak again for several minutes. Branches scraped across tents, and shadows shifted like living things. One hiker, Miguel, swore he saw a figure standing in the moonlight, perfectly still, staring, then vanish when he blinked. The others tried to dismiss it, but unease grew in every rustle, every snapping twig. By midnight, the forest had drawn them deeper. Every path seemed to fold back on itself. Compasses spun, flashlights flickered, and familiar landmarks disappeared. Panic began to thread through their steps, subtle at first, then sharp, unavoidable. They stumbled upon a small hollow beneath an enormous tree. Inside, scraps of clothing, old camping gear, and broken shoes littered the ground. The items seemed recent and ancient at once, as if time had no meaning here. Whispers surrounded them, a chorus of voices repeating names, warnings, and regrets. One of them reached for a name carved into the bark. Their fingers felt the deep gouge pulse beneath their touch. The forest was alive, and it knew them. Shadows pressed closer, twisting forms appearing at the edges of vision, always gone when looked at directly. The screams multiplied. They were everywhere, inside their ears, inside their heads. The forest seemed to echo every thought, every fear, every memory. One voice, clear and deliberate, whispered their darkest secrets back at them. Nina cried out, trying to run. The roots underfoot shifted as if alive, tripping and twisting to hold her in place. Miguel grabbed her arm, but the forest had other plans. A shadow detached itself from the surrounding darkness and lunged. She screamed, and in a blink, it swallowed her whole. The others scrambled blindly through the underbrush, guided by instinct more than reason. Every step seemed to loop back, leading them toward the center, toward the massive blackened tree. Its trunk pulsed faintly, almost like a heartbeat, the carvings shimmering with countless names. The forest was patient, and it remembered every visitor. One of them, Sam, tried to climb a ridge for safety. The forest shifted beneath him, branches reaching like fingers. He fell into a hollow, disoriented, his flashlight spinning wildly, illuminating faces in the roots, faces that twisted and screamed, mouths opening impossibly wide. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time was meaningless. The forest judged each of them, pulling fear and memory from their minds, pressing it into the ground beneath their feet. Their own voices called to them, echoing from everywhere at once. At the base of the massive tree, the remaining hikers found a hollow cavity filled with objects: shoes, backpacks, journals. Some items belonged to those who had vanished long ago. Some were newer. Every piece seemed imbued with the fear and despair of its owner. They realized that the forest collected these things, storing the memories and souls of those who entered too far. A voice whispered in Nina's ear, "You will not leave alone." They tried to run again, but the forest had already mapped their minds. Every step led them deeper into the maze. Every path was a trap, every shadow a memory of someone who had vanished. Panic consumed them, adrenaline and terror entwined, until the forest itself seemed to breathe, pulsing and waiting. The tree loomed larger, impossibly tall, its bark black and glistening, etched with thousands of names. The whispers became words, warnings, confessions, cries for help. Every name carved into the wood seemed alive, twisting and shifting. By dawn, only two remained. They stumbled to the forest's edge, legs raw, eyes wide, hearts hammering. Behind them, the trees swayed in the morning breeze as if nothing had happened. But they had felt the pull, heard the voices, and seen the shapes. They understood, finally, that the forest never forgot. One of them turned and whispered, almost to themselves, "If anyone else comes here, they need to listen, truly listen, or they will not leave." The wind carried the warning away, and the forest waited, patient as ever, remembering everyone who dared to enter. The Forest of Screaming Trees, Episode 4, The One Who Listens. The forest was older than memory. Long before roads, before towns, before the first whisper of a name, it stood in silence watching, waiting, feeding. The people who once lived nearby told stories of its voice, a sound that came when the wind stopped and the world held its breath. They said the forest spoke through the trees, and that if you listened long enough, it would remember your voice forever. Thomas had vanished. Nina's group was gone. Yet the story refused to end. Lena came next, a journalist chasing legends for a dying magazine. She had read Thomas's abandoned notes, piecing together his final recording. Fragments of screams, the echo of roots cracking beneath his feet, and a single whisper at the end. The forest remembers. She told herself it was just sound distortion. By dusk, she was deep inside the valley. Fog rolled low, wrapping around her ankles like fingers. Every path felt wrong. The forest was silent, at first too silent. Then came the faint, rhythmic creak of branches, as if the trees were breathing. Lena spoke into her recorder, entering Sector 3. No visible wildlife, just this noise. The forest exhaled. Somewhere behind her, a branch snapped. She turned, but her light caught only drifting fog. She pushed forward, whispering facts into the darkness to steady herself. But the deeper she walked, the less she trusted the compass, the clock, or even her memory. Each direction seemed to lead back to the same clearing. A tree stood in the center massive, blackened, scarred with 1,000 names. She recognized some from the missing person reports. Others were so old they looked fossilized. She circled it slowly, hand tracing the bark. It felt warm. The first voice came then, whispering her own name from inside the tree. She stumbled back, pulse thundering. "Thomas?" She whispered. The forest answered with a sound like laughter and grief fused together. She felt the roots beneath her shift, the ground flexing, the soil breathing. 1,000 faint voices rose at once, pleading, warning, whispering. Lena recorded everything, desperate for proof. "If anyone hears this," she said, voice shaking, "the forest remembers you once you speak its name. Don't answer when it calls." The air thickened, her flashlight dimmed. Something moved between the trunks, shapes human, but wrong faces stretched, mouths open in silent screams. The bark of nearby trees rippled with movement, as if skin shifted beneath. She ran, branches lashed at her face, roots coiled around her boots. The forest followed, every sound bending toward her, every whisper a memory that wasn't hers. When she tripped, she landed near a shallow pit. Inside, half buried in roots, lay a camera, a cracked watch, and a tattered notebook, the same kind Thomas used. She opened it with trembling fingers. The last entry read, "If you hear them, do not speak back." The forest hissed her name again, closer now, pleading. "Lena, please." She raised her recorder. "You're not him." Then the ground erupted. Roots burst upward, wrapping around her legs, arms, throat. The forest roared, voices merging into a single shriek that shook the air. She screamed once, defiant, before the roots dragged her down into the dark. Silence returned. Days later, hikers found her recorder lying beside the hollow tree. The tape was full, the last few seconds nothing but whispering wind and faint words buried beneath. It listens when you listen back. Locals sealed off the area after that. But stories spread faster than warnings. Videos, blog posts, podcasts, the forest's name was everywhere again. Whispered, shared, repeated. Each mentioned another voice it could hear. And somewhere, far beyond the valley, a familiar wind began to move through distant trees, carrying faint echoes that sounded like laughter. They say if you hear the forest's name and feel compelled to look it up, that's the first step. The forest remembers every search, every curious mind that leans in too close. So if you've heard this story, really heard it, listen carefully tonight. If the wind outside your window sounds like it's breathing your name, don't answer, because that's how it starts. And those who keep listening, who can't resist one more story, one more voice, one more warning, they're already halfway in.